Hello, and welcome back to Blood and Acreage, where we explore the stories of how the land we inherit can shape our lives, and sometimes, tragically, end them. It's a privilege to have you with us. A special thank you to our dedicated community for the incredible insights and discussions on our previous story. Your perspectives are what make this channel so vital. If this is your first time here, and you are drawn to narratives about family, legacy, and the dark deeds that can sprout from the richest soil, you have found your place. Please, take a moment to subscribe and activate notifications so you never miss a chapter. Before we proceed, we must state that the following story is a work of fiction. The names, characters, places, and incidents are entirely the products of the imagination. Any resemblance to actual events or persons, living or dead, is purely coincidental. We often think of blood as being thicker than water. But is it thicker than dirt? Is a lifetime of shared memories more valuable than the soil beneath our feet? Today, we tell the story of a brother and sister, Ethan and Lila. It is a story of a life-changing windfall, a deep-seated greed, and a heinous act of betrayal, all for a piece of land and the compensation money that came with it. The Garrett farm was not a place of prosperity. It was a place of memory. 120 acres of stubborn, rocky soil and sun-bleached pastureland that had been in the family for 4 generations. It had broken the backs of their great-grandparents, humbled their grandparents, and finally, exhausted their parents into an early grave. The land was a relentless, unforgiving patriarch, demanding sacrifice and offering little in return but the view from the front porch and the heavy, cloying scent of pine after a rainstorm. For Ethan Garrett, the farm was a sepia-toned photograph of his childhood. It was the tire swing hanging from the ancient oak, the creek where he'd learned to skip stones, the hayloft where he and his sister had whispered secrets under a blanket of stars. He had escaped it at 18, fleeing to the city with a fierce determination to build a life that wasn't dictated by the seasons and the price of feed. He had become a high school history teacher, a man who dealt in the stories of the past but lived firmly in the present. He had a small, neat apartment, a steady paycheck, and a quiet, uncomplicated life. He loved the farm from a safe, nostalgic distance. For his older sister, Lila, the farm was a cage. She had never left. While Ethan had been studying for exams, she had been nursing their ailing mother. While he had been celebrating his first teaching contract, she had been holding their father's hand as he took his last, rattling breath. She had stayed, tethered to the land by a sense of duty that had long ago curdled into a deep, unspoken resentment. She was married to a man named Rick, a good-natured but perpetually struggling mechanic, and they were raising 2 children in the same drafty, creaking farmhouse that still seemed to hold the echoes of their parents' weary sighs. Lila saw the land not as a collection of memories, but as a ledger of her own sacrifices, a constant, sprawling reminder of the life she hadn't lived. Their relationship was a carefully maintained facade of familial affection. Ethan would drive down from the city every few months, bringing gifts for his niece and nephew, and offering to help with repairs. Lila would cook a big Sunday dinner, they would share stories, and they would carefully, deliberately, avoid the one topic that lay between them like a sleeping beast: the farm. Upon their father's death, the deed had been left to them jointly, a 50/50 inheritance that was, at the time, more of a shared burden than a blessing. The letter that changed everything arrived on a Tuesday, in a crisp, intimidating envelope bearing the logo of a multinational logistics corporation. It was addressed to both of them. Lila opened it with a sense of bored curiosity, assuming it was another notice about property taxes. But as her eyes scanned the dense, legalistic text, her breath caught in her chest. The corporation, Apex Logistics, was planning a massive new distribution hub. They needed land, a lot of it, and the Garrett farm, with its proximity to a little-used state highway, was the perfect location. The letter was a formal offer of acquisition. Lila's eyes skipped past the jargon, the clauses and subclauses, and landed on the number. It was a number so large, so impossibly life-altering, that she had to read it 3 times to be sure she wasn't hallucinating. It was an 8-figure sum. It was not a letter. It was a divine intervention, a lottery ticket, a key to the cage she had been rattling for 2 decades. In that moment, standing in the faded, linoleum-floored kitchen, a profound and terrible transformation began in Lila's soul. The land, her lifelong burden, had suddenly become her salvation. And the compensation money was not a shared inheritance. It was her reward. It was her back pay for a lifetime of sacrifice. It was hers. She called Ethan immediately, her voice a breathless, giddy performance. "You are not going to believe this, Ethan. You need to sit down." Ethan listened, stunned into silence, as she read the letter aloud. The number hung in the air between them, a supernova of possibility. For Ethan, it was a safety net. It was a down payment on a house, a college fund for his future children, a chance to finally feel a sense of security that his modest teacher's salary could never provide. It was a gift from the very land he had run from. That's incredible, Lila," he finally managed to say. "This changes everything." "I know," she laughed, a sound that was a little too sharp, a little too bright. "Can you believe it? After all these years of this place being nothing but a drain, it's finally giving something back. Or at least giving me something back." It was a subtle, probing statement, the first move in a game Ethan didn't even know they were playing. "It's for both of us, Lee," he said gently. "Dad left it to both of us. We'll split it right down the middle. This is a fresh start for all of us. You and Rick can finally get out of debt. Maybe buy a new house, a real house." A small, cold silence met his words. "Of course," Lila said, her voice a fraction of a degree cooler. "Right down the middle. Why don't you drive down this weekend? We can go over the paperwork, figure out our next steps." That weekend, the farmhouse was filled with the tense, electric hum of a life about to be irrevocably altered. Rick was quiet, his eyes wide with a kind of dumbfounded awe at the numbers being discussed, while the kids, sensing the strange energy, were either unnaturally quiet or wildly hyperactive. Lila was a whirlwind of hospitality, cooking all of Ethan's childhood favorites, her conversation a constant, bubbling stream of plans and dreams. "We could buy that little place on the lake, Rick," she said, her eyes gleaming. "And a new truck for you. The kids could go to a private school. We could finally take a real vacation, not just a weekend in a motel." Ethan listened, happy for her, but a small, persistent sense of unease was beginning to creep in. In all her talk of the future, the word "we" seemed to refer only to her, Rick, and the children. He was an observer to the celebration of a fortune that was, in fact, half his. The true conversation happened on Saturday afternoon. They were sitting at the old, scarred kitchen table, the Apex Logistics offer spread between them like a map to a new world. "You know, Ethan," Lila began, her tone casual, her fingers tracing the edge of the paper. "I've been thinking about this split. 50-50 seems fair, on paper. But it's not really, is it?" "What do you mean?" Ethan asked, though he already had a sinking feeling he knew. "Well, I'm the one who's been here," she said, her voice taking on a familiar, long-suffering tone. "I'm the one who changed Mom's bedpans. I'm the one who listened to Dad's rambling stories for the last 5 years of his life. I'm the one who's been patching this leaky roof and paying the taxes and keeping this place from being condemned, while you were off in the city, living your life." Every word was a carefully sharpened dart of guilt. "Lila, that's not fair," Ethan countered, his own defenses rising. "I wanted to help more. You know I did. You told me not to, you told me to focus on my career. And you did," she said, her voice hardening. "You built your life. This," she slapped the table, "this is my life. This land, this money, is my chance to finally have what you've had. A real life, a chance to get out. And you will," he insisted. "Your half of this money will give you that. It will give you more than that." "Will it?" she asked, her eyes narrowing. "After we pay off the mortgage on this place and Rick's business debts, and all the credit cards we've been living on for the past 10 years? It's a lot of money, Ethan, but it's not never work again money. Not for a family of 4. But for you, a single man, your half is a fortune. It's an indulgence. For me, it's a necessity. He stared at her, the true, ugly shape of her argument finally coming into focus. What are you asking for, Lila? She took a deep breath, her gaze unwavering. I think it would be the right thing to do, the decent thing. For you to sign your share over to me. Not all of it, of course, she added quickly, a gesture of feigned generosity. You should take something for your trouble. 100,000, maybe. Enough for a down payment on a bigger apartment. But the bulk of it, the land, should be mine. I've earned it. I've paid for it with my youth. Ethan was speechless. The audacity of it, the sheer, breathtaking greed, was like a physical blow. He looked at his sister, the girl he had whispered secrets with in the hayloft, and saw a complete and utter stranger, a woman with a cold, hard hunger in her eyes that chilled him to the bone. No, he said, his voice quiet but firm. Absolutely not. Ethan, please. No, he repeated, his voice rising with a strength he didn't know he had. That is the most selfish, most insulting thing you have ever said to me. This isn't your back pay, Lila. This is Mom and Dad's legacy. It belongs to both of us equally. That was their final wish, and I am going to honor it. We will split it 50-50. That is the end of the discussion. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. I came down here to sign the preliminary acceptance letter with you. That's it. We can hire lawyers, financial advisors, and figure out the rest later. But the split is not, and never will be, up for debate. The look on Lila's face was something Ethan would never forget. The mask of the long-suffering sister, of the reasonable negotiator, fell away completely. For a split second, he saw a look of such pure, venomous hatred that he flinched. It was the look of a starving animal having a meal snatched from its jaws. She recovered quickly, her expression smoothing over into a mask of wounded hurt. Fine, she said, her voice a clipped, cold whisper. If that's how you feel, we'll do it your way. But as Ethan walked out onto the porch to get some air, to let the cool evening breeze clear his head, he felt a profound and unsettling shift. He had won the argument, but he felt as though he had just lost something far more important. He had lost the sepia-toned photograph of his sister. He had lost the naive belief that their shared history meant more than a number on a piece of paper. He did not see the look Lila exchanged with her husband, Rick, a look that was both a promise and a command. He did not hear the quiet, chilling words she spoke after he had left the room. He won't listen to reason, Rick, she had whispered, her voice a low, dangerous hum. He's going to steal our future. He's going to steal my life. He's always been selfish. She looked out the window at her brother, who stood with his back to them, looking out over the land that was supposed to be her salvation. He was no longer her brother. He was an obstacle, problem, a 50% complication that needed to be removed. It's not fair, she whispered, her hands clenching into tight, white-knuckled fists. It's just not fair. And in her mind, a cold, simple, and utterly monstrous solution began to take root. If he wouldn't give her the inheritance, she would simply have to take it. The atmosphere in the Garrett farmhouse the next morning was thick with a false, brittle cheerfulness. Lila moved about the kitchen with a frantic, theatrical energy, making pancakes, pouring coffee, her laughter a little too loud, her smiles a little too bright. It was a performance, and Ethan, still unsettled from the previous day's confrontation, was its unwilling audience. He wanted to pack his bag and drive back to the city, to put 100 miles between himself and the cold, greedy stranger who was wearing his sister's face. But there was the matter of the acceptance letter, the first legal step in a process that now felt less like a blessing and more like a curse. We need to be on the same page before we sign anything, Lila said, her tone all business, as she placed a plate of pancakes in front of him. I was emotional yesterday. I apologize. You're right. 50-50. We'll make it work. Ethan felt a surge of relief, mixed with a foolish, lingering guilt. He had been hard on her. She had been through a lot. Perhaps he had misjudged the depth of her resentment. Thank you, Lee, he said, his voice full of a gratitude she did not deserve. I know this is a lot to process. We'll get through it together. It was Rick who made the suggestion that sealed Ethan's fate. He drifted into the kitchen, his expression weary, his eyes avoiding Ethan's. Rick was a simple man, a follower, not a leader. He was a boat without a rudder, and Lila was the storm that directed his course. You know, Rick said, his voice hesitant, as if reciting a line he had been told to memorize. Before you head back, Ethan, you two should take one last walk. For old time's sake. Go out to the old northern pasture. See the view from the ravine. It'll all be gone soon. Lila seized on the idea. That's a wonderful idea, honey. Oh, Ethan, we have to. Remember how we used to dare each other to get close to the edge. We should go. Just us. Before we sign the papers. A final goodbye to the old place. Something about the suggestion felt wrong. It was too sentimental, too staged. But to refuse would be to admit his distrust, to shatter the fragile peace she had just offered. And so he agreed. Sure, he said, forcing a smile. A final walk. Why not? The plan had been solidified the night before, in the hushed, dark intimacy of their bedroom. Lila had not pleaded with Rick. She had presented her solution as an undeniable, logical necessity. She was the architect and he was her reluctant, terrified contractor. He's going to take half of it, Rick, she had whispered, her voice a venomous caress in the dark. Half of our future. We'll be stuck here forever, just with slightly less debt. We'll watch him jet off to Europe, buy a fancy car, while our kids are wearing second-hand clothes. Is that what you want? Lila, what are you saying? Rick had stammered, his heart beginning to pound. I'm saying, she had continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush, that the northern ravine is a long way from the house. The trail is overgrown. The edge is unstable. People have accidents all the time. Tragic, terrible accidents. You're talking about killing him, Rick had choked out, the words tasting like poison. Your own brother. I'm talking about claiming what's mine, she had corrected him, her voice as cold and hard as river stone. He made his choice. He chose the city. He abandoned this place. He abandoned us. This is our reward. He is the only thing standing in the way. He would be reported missing. He'd stormed off, angry about the money. He just disappeared. Who would question it? By the time they found him, if they ever did, it would just be a sad accident. A hiker who fell. And the land, the entire inheritance, would be ours. She had played on his weakness, his fears, his desperation. By dawn, he was no longer her husband. He was her accomplice. The walk was a surreal, funereal procession. The sun was bright, the sky a brilliant, cloudless blue. But the beauty of the day only served to highlight the ugliness of the situation. Lila kept up a stream of cheerful, nostalgic chatter, pointing out old landmarks, reminiscing about their childhood. It was a flawless performance. Ethan walked beside her, his responses monosyllabic, the sense of dread growing with every step. The trail to the northern ravine was, as Rick had said, overgrown and treacherous. It was a part of the farm they had rarely visited, a wild, untamed corner of the property. The ravine itself was a deep, jagged scar in the earth, carved out by a creek that was now just a trickle at the bottom. The drop was at least 100 feet, a sheer cliff of crumbling shale and exposed tree roots. Look, Lila said, her voice full of a false wonder. You can see the whole valley from here. Remember how Dad used to say this was his favorite spot? They stood near the edge, the wind whipping at their clothes. Ethan kept a respectful distance, a primal, instinctual fear of heights keeping him back. Lila, however, walked right to the precipice, her feet sending a small shower of pebbles skittering into the abyss. Come on, Eth, she said, turning to him, a strange, bright smile on her face. Don't be a coward. Come look. I'm good from here, Lee, he said, a cold knot tightening in his stomach. Her smile was wrong. Her eyes were too bright. Oh, don't be silly, she said, her voice a playful, dangerous taunt. She took a step towards him and grabbed his hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. Just one look. For old time's sake. She pulled him forward. He stumbled, his feet clumsy on the uneven ground. He was now only a few feet from the edge. He could see the dizzying drop, the rocks at the bottom. And in that moment, as he looked at his sister's face, at her wide, unblinking eyes, he finally truly understood. This was not a walk. This was an execution. His realization came a split second too late. As he tried to pull his hand away, to scramble backwards, he heard a rustle in the trees behind him. He half turned and saw Rick, his face a pale, sweaty mask of terror and resolve. Rick was holding a heavy, weathered piece of oak, a fallen branch as thick as a man's arm. "Lila, no," Ethan whispered, his voice a strangled plea. "I'm sorry, Ethan," she said, and her voice held no sorrow at all. "You should have just signed the papers." Rick lunged forward, swinging the branch in a clumsy, brutal arc. It connected with the back of Ethan's head with a sickening, wet crack. The world exploded in a starburst of white-hot pain. Ethan's legs buckled, his grip on Lila's hand slackening. He staggered forward, his arms flailing, a single, uncomprehending gasp escaping his lips. Lila did not let go. She used his own momentum, his own dead weight, and with a final, decisive shove, she pushed her brother over the edge of the ravine. He was gone. There was no scream, only the sound of his body crashing through the undergrowth on the cliff face. A series of sickening thuds that ended with a final, terrible silence. Lila and Rick stood on the edge, their chests heaving, the wind whipping at their faces. Rick dropped the branch as if it were on fire, a low, animalistic moan of horror escaping his lips. He stumbled back and vomited into the bushes. Lila, however, was perfectly still. She looked down into the ravine, her expression unreadable. She felt nothing. No guilt, no remorse, no grief. Only a profound, chilling sense of release. The obstacle was gone. The complication had been removed. The inheritance was now whole. "Pull yourself together, Rick," she said, her voice as cold and sharp as the wind. "The hard part is over. Now we just have to be smart." The cover-up was as cold-blooded as the murder itself. They did not climb down to check the body. They left him where he lay, a broken secret at the bottom of a forgotten ravine. They walked back to the house, their route a careful, deliberate one, avoiding the main trail. Back at the farmhouse, Lila took control. She packed a small overnight bag with some of Ethan's things. She took his wallet and his phone. She was meticulous. She then drove his car, with Rick following in their truck, to a bus station in a town 2 counties over. She wiped the car down, inside and out, removing any trace of her fingerprints. She dropped his wallet into a trash can near the station and threw his phone into a storm drain. She left the car in the long-term parking lot, a silent, abandoned testament to a man who had simply decided to leave. When they returned to the farm hours later, the second act of the performance began. At around 6 o'clock that evening, Lila called the sheriff's department. Her voice was a masterpiece of controlled panic and sisterly concern. "My brother Ethan Garrett," she said, her voice breaking convincingly. "He's gone. We had a fight this morning. A stupid fight about the farm, about the money. He got so angry. He said he was leaving, that he wanted nothing to do with any of it. He packed a bag and stormed out. I thought he'd cool off and come back, but he's been gone all day. I'm worried something has happened to him." The story was perfect. It provided a motive for his disappearance. It explained his abandoned car, and it painted Lila as the worried, heartbroken sister. The sheriff, a local man who had known the Garretts for years, was sympathetic. He assured her they would put out a bulletin, but he also gently suggested that family disputes were common, and that Ethan had likely just gone back to the city to cool his head. That night, Lila slept more soundly than she had in years. She dreamed of a new house, of a life without debt, of a future that was finally, completely, hers. She did not dream of her brother. She had already buried him, not just in the ravine, but in a shallow, unmarked grave in the coldest, darkest corner of her own soul. In the weeks that followed Ethan's disappearance, a strange, heavy quiet settled over the Garrett farm. It was the quiet of a secret, a toxic silence that seeped into the very foundations of the old house. Outwardly, Lila played the part of the grieving, abandoned sister with an unnerving, theatrical perfection. She coordinated with the local sheriff, a kind but overworked man named Bill Henderson. She put up missing posters in town, her face a mask of somber concern. She spoke to Ethan's friends from the city, her voice cracking as she recounted the story of their terrible fight and his impulsive departure. Most people accepted the narrative. Ethan had always been the restless one, the one who had escaped. It was plausible that a life-changing sum of money could unhinge a person, could cause them to act erratically. The abandoned car at the bus station was a powerful piece of evidence. The case of Ethan Garrett was filed away as a voluntary disappearance, a man who had walked away from his life. But the money, the great catalyst for the crime, did not come. The Apex Logistics deal was frozen. With one of the landowners missing, the contracts could not be finalized. The eight-figure sum remained a tantalizing, infuriating mirage on the horizon. Lila, who had committed murder to claim her salvation, found herself in a new, more agonizing kind of purgatory. To get the money, she needed Ethan to be declared legally dead, a process that would take 7 long, agonizing years. The perfect crime had an imperfect, maddening outcome. The secret began to rot her life from the inside out. Her relationship with Rick, once a partnership of quiet desperation, became a shared prison sentence. He was haunted, a ghost in his own life. He drank heavily, his nights filled with whispered, terrified apologies to a brother-in-law who could not hear him. He would wake up screaming from nightmares of the ravine. "We have to tell someone, Lila," he would plead, his eyes wild with a mixture of terror and guilt. "I can't live like this. I see his face every time I close my eyes." "You will say nothing," Lila would hiss, her voice a low, venomous threat. "You are in this as deep as I am. Do you want to go to prison? Do you want our children to have no parents? We did what we had to do. Now you will hold your tongue and you will be a man." But Rick was broken, and Lila, her frustration mounting with every passing day that the money remained out of reach, grew to despise him for his weakness. Her dream, which had been so close she could taste it, was now trapped behind a wall of legal red tape, and she was locked in a crumbling farmhouse with a man who was a constant, trembling reminder of the price she had paid. The first thread in the unraveling of their secret was pulled not by the police, but by nature. The region was hit by a severe, unseasonable storm that summer, a torrential, week-long downpour that turned the dusty landscape to a sea of mud. The creek at the bottom of the northern ravine, usually a docile trickle, swelled into a raging, angry river. It tore at the soft shale of the cliff face, causing a series of small landslides, altering the landscape, and in its violent churning, it dislodged Ethan's body from the shallow, debris-covered grave where it had come to rest. His remains were washed downstream, carried for miles before finally coming to rest in a thicket of reeds on the bank of a larger river, on property owned by another farmer. The discovery of the body, 2 months after his disappearance, changed everything. The county coroner was able to identify Ethan from dental records. The initial examination revealed what Lila and Rick already knew. The cause of death was not a fall. It was blunt force trauma to the back of the skull, an injury inconsistent with a simple slip from a cliff edge. The case was no longer a missing persons report. It was a homicide. The investigation was handed over from the local sheriff's department to the State Bureau of Investigation. The lead detective assigned to the case was a woman named Maria Sanchez, a sharp, methodical investigator with a reputation for seeing the cracks in a story that everyone else missed. She started from the beginning, and she did not have the local sheriff's sentimental, long-standing connection to the Garrett family. She saw only the facts, and the facts were troubling. Why would a man who was about to inherit millions of dollars voluntarily disappear? Why would he leave his car, but take none of his money from his bank account? Why was his phone, when it was finally recovered from the storm drain by a forensics team, completely clean, with no calls or texts indicating a plan to leave. Detective Sanchez's focus fell squarely on the last two people to see Ethan alive: his sister and her husband. She re-interviewed them, but this time the atmosphere was not one of sympathetic concern. It was cold, clinical, and accusatory. Lila stuck to her story, her performance even more polished, now layered with a convincing, tragic grief. "So he didn't run away," she said, tears streaming down her face. Someone must have hurt him. A drifter, maybe, at the bus station." But Rick crumbled under the relentless, dispassionate pressure of Sanchez's questioning. His carefully rehearsed lines began to fray. He contradicted himself on minor details. His hands trembled. He couldn't make eye contact. He was a man drowning in guilt, and Sanchez saw it. She separated them and worked on him alone. "We know you're lying, Rick," she said, her voice calm and even. "We know there was a fight. We know it was about the money. Your wife stands to inherit everything now, doesn't she? A grieving widow sister. It's a very convenient outcome." "It wasn't like that," he stammered. "Then what was it like?" she pressed. "Tell me what happened, Rick. Tell me how his head was crushed before he ever went over that cliff. Tell me why a man with a broken skull would decide to go for a hike. Help yourself, Rick. Because right now, your wife is in the next room, and I guarantee you she is building a story that will put you in a cage for the rest of your life." That was all it took. The vision of Lila, his cold, dominant wife, sacrificing him to save herself, was a future he could easily imagine. The dam of his fear and guilt burst, and the whole ugly, sordid story came pouring out in a torrent of sobs and broken confessions. He told them everything. Lila's greed, her cold-blooded plan, the walk to the ravine, the branch, the push. He led them to the spot where he had thrown the murder weapon, and the police divers found it, half buried in the mud of a nearby pond. When Sanchez confronted Lila with her husband's confession, she did not break. She did not cry. Her face hardened into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. "He's a liar," she spat, her voice dripping with venom. "He's a weak, pathetic drunk, and he's trying to save his own skin. He probably killed Ethan himself, for the money." But the evidence was overwhelming. Rick's confession, the murder weapon, the forensics. The perfect crime had been undone by a guilty conscience and a summer storm. The trial was a grim, pathetic spectacle. Lila's attempts to pin the blame on her husband were transparent and ugly, painting a portrait not of a grieving sister, but of a ruthless, manipulative sociopath. Rick, a broken man, testified against his own wife, his voice a monotone of regret. Lila was found guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy. Rick, in exchange for his testimony, was convicted of manslaughter. They were both sentenced to long prison terms. Their children were sent to live with Rick's sister in another state, their lives forever tainted by the heinous act their parents had committed. The Apex Logistics deal, of course, was canceled. The corporation withdrew its offer, unwilling to be associated with a piece of land that was now a notorious crime scene. The 8-figure sum that Lila had killed for vanished like smoke. The land, the source of all the greed and tragedy, remained. It was now an orphan, a piece of cursed ground held in a legal trust, its fields unplowed, its farmhouse slowly surrendering to the elements. The inheritance was finally settled, not in a bank, but in a courtroom. Lila had inherited a life sentence. Rick had inherited a lifetime of guilt. And Ethan, the kind, simple man who had just wanted to honor his parents' wishes, had inherited a premature, unmarked grave. The land, the silent, unforgiving patriarch, had claimed its final sacrifice, leaving behind nothing but the bitter, cautionary tale of a greedy sister, a life taken too soon, and a fortune that had turned to dust.